Today is holiday, so the cafe is closed. And we are going to a park to have a picnic and play cricket.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong there?
अब मैं नहीं रह सकती तुम लोगों के साथ तुम लोगों को परेशान हूँ दोनों से दोनों ही मतलब मेरे से भी जिम्मेदार
The tension inside the house had been building for weeks, and everyone could feel it. What once seemed like a hopeful love story between Jenny and Sumit was now slowly turning into one of the most uncomfortable situations fans had ever seen on 90 Day Fiancé. Jenny had moved across the world for love. She left behind everything she knew, her home, her comfort, her friends, and even her sense of security, all because she believed that Sumit truly loved her and would stand by her no matter what. But living under the same roof as Sumit's parents was proving to be far more difficult than she had ever imagined. From the moment she arrived, Sumit's mother made it painfully clear that she did not approve of Jenny, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Every small moment inside the house felt like a test. Jenny tried to remain calm and respectful, but the pressure kept growing day by day. Sumit's mother watched everything she did. If Jenny sat down for too long, she was criticized. If she cooked, it wasn't done correctly. If she tried to help around the house, it somehow still wasn't good enough. The constant judgment slowly started to wear Jenny down emotionally. At first, Jenny tried to laugh it off. She told herself that maybe this was just cultural differences and that things would eventually improve. But as the days passed, the situation only became worse. Sumit's mother started treating Jenny less like a guest and more like someone who was expected to save the family. She ordered Jenny to clean, cook, and handle household chores while she watched closely, correcting every tiny mistake. Jenny began to feel like she wasn't being treated like a future daughter-in-law at all. Instead, she felt like she was being treated like a servant in the very home where she was supposed to feel welcomed. The uncomfortable dynamic quickly became impossible to ignore. Even the cameras captured the awkward silence and tension filling the rooms. Every conversation felt heavy. Every look carried judgment. And through it all, Sumit remained stuck in the middle, torn between the woman he loved and the mother he had always obeyed. For a long time, Sumit tried to avoid confrontation. That had always been his way of dealing with conflict. He hoped that if he stayed quiet long enough, things would calm down on their own. But this time, staying silent was only making things worse. Jenny could feel the emotional distance growing between them. She started wondering whether Sumit would ever truly stand up for her. One evening, the tension finally reached a breaking point. Jenny had spent most of the day helping around the house, trying once again to prove that she respected the family and wanted to be accepted. She washed dishes, cleaned the kitchen, and even helped prepare food the way Sumit's mother demanded. But instead of appreciation, she received more criticism. Sumit's mother inspected the kitchen and immediately began pointing out everything Jenny had done wrong. Her tone was sharp and cold. She told Jenny that the kitchen was still not clean enough, that the food preparation was sloppy, and that she needed to learn how things were done properly. Jenny stood there quietly, trying to hold back her frustration. She felt embarrassed and humiliated. It wasn't just the criticism that hurt. It was the way it was delivered, as if Jenny had no dignity at all. As the lecture continued, something inside Sumit finally snapped. For the first time since Jenny had arrived, he could no longer pretend that everything was normal. He had watched Jenny try again and again to win his mother's approval, only to be treated like someone who didn't belong there. And suddenly, he realized that if he didn't speak up now, he might lose Jenny forever. The room fell silent as Sumit took a deep breath and stepped forward. His voice was calm at first, but there was a firmness in it that his parents had rarely heard before. He told his mother that Jenny was doing her best and that the constant criticism was unfair. His mother looked shocked. She wasn't used to Sumit questioning her authority, especially not in front of others. For years, Sumit had always been the obedient son who avoided conflict at all costs. But this moment was different. Sumit continued speaking, explaining that Jenny had come all the way from another country for him and that she deserved respect. His words carried years of suppressed emotion. He told his mother that treating Jenny like a servant was wrong and that it needed to stop. The tension in the room instantly intensified. Sumit's father watched silently, clearly surprised by the sudden confrontation. But Sumit's mother was not ready to back down. Her expression hardened, and she immediately pushed back against Sumit's words. She insisted that Jenny needed to learn discipline and respect for their household rules. According to her, she was only trying to teach Jenny how things were done properly. But Sumit was no longer willing to accept that explanation. He told his mother that teaching someone did not mean humiliating them. Jenny stood nearby, completely stunned by what she was hearing. For so long, she had hoped that Sumit would defend her, but part of her had started to believe it might never happen. Hearing him finally speak up filled her with both relief and anxiety. She knew that confronting his mother could lead to even bigger problems within the family. The argument quickly escalated as emotions on both sides began to rise. Sumit's mother accused Jenny of creating problems in the family and claimed that their relationship had already brought enough shame to them. The age difference between Sumit and Jenny had always been a major issue for his parents, and they had never fully accepted it. To them, Jenny was not only an outsider but also someone who had disrupted their son's life. Sumit responded firmly, saying that his relationship with Jenny was his choice and that he would not allow her to be disrespected anymore. It was a bold statement that shocked everyone in the room. For the first time, Sumit was clearly choosing Jenny over his mother's expectations. The silence that followed felt almost unbearable. Jenny could barely believe what was happening. For years, their relationship had been filled with secrets, lies, and complicated family drama. But in this moment, Sumit was finally showing the kind of commitment she had always wanted from him. However, the confrontation was far from over. Sumit's mother was not ready to accept defeat, and the tension inside the house was about to reach a level that no one could have predicted. The silence hanging in the room after Sumit's words felt heavier than anything that had happened before. Everyone could sense that something had shifted. For years, Sumit had always chosen the path of least resistance when it came to his parents, especially his mother. He avoided arguments, he avoided confrontation, and many times he simply stayed quiet even when things were clearly unfair. But this time the situation was different. This time Jenny was standing right there, watching everything unfold, and Sumit knew that if he backed down again, it would destroy whatever trust was left between them. Jenny stood near the kitchen counter, her hands slightly trembling. She had tried so hard to stay respectful since arriving. She followed the rules, she tried to learn the household routines, and she made every effort to show Sumit's parents that she wasn't there to cause trouble. Yet no matter what she did, it seemed like she could never meet the expectations placed on her. Now, watching Sumit finally speak up for her was something she had almost stopped believing would ever happen. But that moment of relief quickly turned into anxiety when Sumit's mother suddenly stepped forward, her face filled with anger and disbelief. She stared directly at her son as if she could not recognize the person standing in front of her. For years she had believed that Sumit would always listen to her, always follow her guidance, and always respect the traditions of the family. Hearing him defend Jenny so openly felt like a betrayal in her eyes. She raised her voice and asked Sumit how he could dare to question her in her own house. According to her, everything she had done was only meant to teach Jenny how to behave properly in their home. She insisted that discipline and respect were part of the culture and that Jenny needed to understand that if she wanted to be accepted. But Sumit refused to stay quiet anymore. His voice remained firm, and he explained that there was a difference between teaching someone and humiliating them every single day. He pointed out that Jenny had already left her entire life behind just to be with him. She had traveled across the world and entered a completely unfamiliar environment, surrounded by people who openly disapproved of her. Instead of receiving kindness, she was constantly criticized and treated as if she didn't belong there. Sumit told his mother that no one deserved to be treated that way. The words echoed through the room, and the tension continued rising. Sumit's father remained silent, sitting in his chair and watching the argument unfold. His expression showed concern, but he seemed reluctant to get involved directly. The situation had clearly gone beyond a simple disagreement. This was years of frustration finally surfacing all at once. Jenny tried to remain calm, but the emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. She had spent so long feeling powerless in this house. Every day felt like she had to prove that she deserved to be there, and even then it never seemed to be enough. Hearing Sumit defend her was powerful, but it also made her realize how fragile their situation still was. If this argument escalated further, It could completely destroy whatever small chance remained for peace between her and Sumit's parents. Sumit's mother crossed her arms and looked directly at Jenny with a cold expression. She accused Jenny of turning Sumit against his own family. In her mind, the situation was simple. She believed that before Jenny came into Sumit's life, everything had been normal. Now their household was filled with conflict and tension. She blamed Jenny for all of it. Jenny tried to speak, her voice soft but emotional. She explained that she never wanted to cause problems in the family. All she ever wanted was to build a life with Sumit. She respected his parents and had tried again and again to earn their acceptance. But the constant criticism and humiliation had made it nearly impossible for her to feel comfortable in the house. Her words were honest and vulnerable, but they didn't soften Sumit's mother at all. Instead, the older woman shook her head and insisted that Jenny was simply unwilling to adapt to their way of life. She believed Jenny was too old for her son and that their relationship had already brought enough embarrassment to the family. The age difference had always been a central issue for Sumit's parents, and they had never hidden their discomfort about it. But hearing it spoken so bluntly again in that moment felt like reopening an old wound. Sumit immediately responded, saying that he was tired of hearing the same argument repeated over and over again. He reminded his mother that he loved Jenny and that their relationship was not something that would disappear just because his parents disapproved. He had already spent years hiding his feelings and trying to balance both sides of his life, but now he wanted to live honestly. Jenny watched him carefully as he spoke. There was something different in his tone. It wasn't just frustration. It sounded like determination. For a long time, she had questioned whether Sumit truly had the courage to stand up for their relationship when it mattered most. Now she was finally seeing that side of him, and it was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. The room grew quiet again for a moment before Sumit's mother spoke once more. Her voice was calmer now, but the tension in it was still obvious. She warned Sumit that choosing Jenny over his family would have serious consequences. In her view, family loyalty came above everything else. If Sumit decided to continue this relationship despite their objections, he would be going against the very values he had been raised with. It was an emotional ultimatum that struck deeply. Sumit looked down for a moment, clearly feeling the weight of his mother's words. The conflict between love and family expectations had been haunting him for years. But this time he didn't retreat into silence like he had in the past. He lifted his head and spoke quietly but firmly. He told his mother that loving Jenny did not mean he loved his family any less, but it did mean that he could not allow Jenny to be treated with disrespect anymore. Those words marked a turning point in the argument. The conversation was no longer just about chores or household expectations. It had become a direct confrontation about the future of Sumit and Jenny's relationship. Jenny felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened. She knew how difficult it was for Sumit to speak to his parents this way. The cultural pressure he faced was enormous, and defying family expectations was not something that came easily. But at the same time, she also knew that if they were ever going to build a real life together, moments like this were unavoidable. The tension remained thick in the air as everyone stood there processing what had just been said. Sumit's father finally shifted slightly in his seat, as if he might speak, but he still remained quiet. The entire house felt frozen in that moment of uncertainty. What had started as criticism about cleaning the kitchen had turned into one of the most intense family confrontations anyone in the room had ever experienced. And while Sumit had finally defended Jenny, the reaction from his mother made it clear that the battle for acceptance was far from over. The real question now was whether this confrontation would bring them closer to understanding each other or push the family even further apart than before. The air in the house felt tense enough to cut with a knife. After everything that had just been said, no one knew what would happen next. Sumit stood there quietly, but the determination in his eyes had not disappeared. For the first time in a very long time, he had finally said the words he had been holding back for years. Jenny could see that this moment had taken everything out of him emotionally, but she also knew something important had changed. The old version of Sumit who stayed silent and avoided confrontation was slowly disappearing. Jenny wiped the corner of her eyes as she tried to stay composed. She had never wanted to be the reason for a major conflict between Sumit and his parents. From the very beginning of their relationship, she understood how deeply family expectations mattered in his culture. That was why she had always tried to stay respectful, even when things became painful. But the constant criticism had started to break her down emotionally. Being treated like she was nothing more than a burden in the house had made her question whether she could continue living this way. Sumit's mother looked from Jenny back to her son, her expression still filled with disbelief. She had expected Sumit to eventually calm down and return to his usual obedient behavior. But instead, he was standing there with a firmness she had never seen before. It was clear that he was not going to take back what he had said. She spoke again, this time with a quieter but sharper tone. She told Sumit that he was forgetting everything his family had sacrificed for him. She reminded him of how they raised him, how they supported him throughout his life, and how they had always wanted the best future for him. According to her, Jenny was not part of that future. In her eyes, Jenny represented a mistake that Sumit was refusing to admit. Sumit listened carefully, but he didn't interrupt this time. When his mother finished speaking, he took a slow breath before responding. He told her that he would always respect his parents and appreciate everything they had done for him. But respect, he explained, should not mean ignoring injustice when it was happening right in front of him. Jenny looked at him with surprise. She had heard Sumit talk about his parents many times before, but she had never heard him express his thoughts this openly in front of them. It was as if years of suppressed frustration were finally being released all at once. Sumit continued, explaining that Jenny had been trying to prove herself since the day she arrived. She woke up early, helped with chores, tried to cook the way his mother wanted, and followed every instruction given to her. But no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed to be enough. He turned toward Jenny briefly before continuing his words. He said that watching her struggle every day had been painful for him. At first he believed that if everyone simply gave it time, things would eventually improve. But instead of getting better, the situation kept getting worse. Sumit's father finally spoke for the first time since the argument began. His voice was calm but serious. He told Sumit that family harmony was extremely important and that arguments like this could damage relationships that had taken decades to build. He asked Sumit whether defending Jenny in this way was really worth risking that harmony. The question hung in the air for several seconds. It was the kind of question that forced Sumit to confront the reality of his choices. Choosing Jenny meant challenging his family's expectations in a way that could permanently change their relationship. But Sumit did not hesitate long. He answered that protecting someone he loved should never be considered wrong. Jenny felt her chest tighten as she heard those words. For years she had waited to hear Sumit speak with that kind of certainty about their relationship. However, Sumit's mother was clearly not convinced. She shook her head slowly and said that love alone was not enough to build a proper marriage. In her view, marriage required compatibility, respect for family traditions, and approval from the people closest to you. She believed that Sumit and Jenny's relationship lacked all of those things. Jenny finally spoke again, her voice shaking slightly but filled with honesty. She explained that she understood their concerns about culture, age, and reputation. She had heard those arguments many times before. But what hurt the most was feeling like she was never given a real chance to show who she truly was. She told Sumit's parents that she didn't expect them to immediately accept her. Acceptance takes time. But being constantly criticized and treated like a servant made it impossible to build any kind of positive relationship with them. The room fell quiet again after her words. For a brief moment, even Sumit's mother seemed to pause and think about what had just been said. But the silence didn't last long. Sumit's mother suddenly stood up from her seat and began pacing slowly across the room. The frustration in her body language was obvious. She said that the entire situation had already brought enough embarrassment to the family and that neighbors and relatives had been talking about it for years. She looked directly at Sumit and said something that immediately shocked everyone in the room. She told him that if he continued choosing Jenny over his family's wishes, he should be prepared to live with the consequences of that decision completely on his own. Jenny felt her heart drop when she heard those words. It sounded dangerously close to an ultimatum. Sumit also looked stunned for a moment, but he didn't step back from his position. Instead, he spoke more calmly than before. He said that he never wanted to lose his family, but he also could not abandon the person he loved just to keep everyone else comfortable. His father sighed deeply, clearly realizing how serious the situation had become. The entire argument had grown far beyond a simple disagreement about house rules or chores. Now it was about loyalty, identity, and the future of their family. Jenny stood quietly beside Sumit, unsure what would happen next. Part of her felt grateful that he was finally defending her. But another part of her feared that this confrontation might push his parents even further away from accepting their relationship. As the tension continued to fill the room, one thing was becoming clear to everyone involved. The relationship between Jenny and Sumit had reached a critical turning point. There was no longer any way to avoid the reality of their situation. Either the family would eventually find a way to accept Jenny, or the conflict would grow so large that it could tear the entire family apart. And at that moment, no one in the room truly knew which direction things were about to go. For several long seconds, no one said anything. The tension in the room had reached a point where even the smallest sound felt loud. Jenny could hear her own heartbeat as she stood beside Sumit. The words his mother had just spoken were still echoing in her mind. If Sumit continued choosing her, he might have to face the consequences alone. It sounded less like a warning and more like a line being drawn in the sand. Sumit remained standing, but the weight of the moment was clearly pressing on him. This was the kind of situation he had always feared. For years he had tried to balance two completely different worlds. On one side was the woman he loved, the person he had chosen to build a future with. On the other side was his family, the people who raised him and whose approval meant everything in the culture he grew up in. But that balance was now impossible. The confrontation had forced everyone to face the truth. Jenny glanced at Sumit quietly. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Even though he had defended her, she knew this decision was not easy for him. Choosing love over family expectations was something that could change his life forever. Sumit's mother stopped pacing and turned toward them again. Her expression was still stern, but now there was also a sense of emotional exhaustion on her face. She said that she had tried to guide her son because she believed she understood what would make his life stable and respectable. To her, Jenny represented a path full of complications and public embarrassment. She explained that people in their community had already been talking for years about the unusual relationship between Sumit and Jenny. The age difference alone had shocked many relatives. In her mind, allowing that relationship to continue meant accepting a situation that went completely against the traditional expectations she had always believed in. Sumit listened carefully but shook his head slowly. He said that living according to other people's opinions had already caused enough damage in his life. For years he had hidden his relationship, lied to his family, and carried the stress of keeping secrets. All of that had only made things worse. Now, he said, he wanted to live honestly. Jenny watched the conversation unfold, feeling both nervous and hopeful at the same time. She knew that honesty had always been a problem in their relationship. The early years between her and Sumit had been filled with secrets, misunderstandings, and painful revelations. But in this moment, Sumit was finally showing the courage to face everything openly. Sumit continued speaking, explaining that Jenny was not someone who came into his life casually. Their relationship had survived years of pressure, distance, and family opposition. If they had been able to endure all of that, then their connection clearly meant something real. He turned slightly toward his mother and said something that made the room even quieter. He said that Jenny was not a servant, not a burden, and not a mistake. She was his wife and the person he had chosen to share his life with. Jenny felt tears forming again when she heard those words. For so long she had wondered whether Sumit would ever fully claim their relationship in front of his parents. Hearing him say it so clearly made the emotional weight of the moment almost overwhelming. But Sumit's mother was not ready to accept that statement. She immediately responded that marriage should not only be about personal feelings. In her opinion, a marriage also involved family approval, cultural respect, and social harmony. Without those elements, she believed the relationship would always face problems. Sumit's father looked between the three of them carefully. It was clear he understood both sides of the argument. On one hand, he recognized the importance of family unity and tradition. On the other hand, he could see how deeply his son cared about Jenny. He finally spoke again, his voice calm but thoughtful. He said that sometimes life presents situations where there are no easy answers. Families want to protect their children, but children also have the right to choose their own paths. His words didn't solve the conflict, but they changed the tone of the conversation slightly. For the first time since the argument began, the discussion sounded less like a fight and more like an attempt to understand each other. Jenny decided to speak once more. She stepped forward slightly and said that she never expected Sumit's parents to change their feelings overnight. Acceptance cannot be forced. But what she hoped for was simply a chance to be treated with dignity and respect while they tried to figure things out as a family. She explained that being treated like a servant had made her feel small and unwelcome. She didn't want to replace anyone or create division in the family. She only wanted to build a life with Sumit while still respecting the people who meant so much to him. For the first time during the entire confrontation, Sumit's mother didn't immediately argue back. She looked at Jenny carefully, as if evaluating whether those words were sincere.